For 3 decades, Intel wasn't just a chip company. It was the nervous system of modern computing. Intel Inside became one of the most successful marketing campaigns in history, stamped onto nearly every personal computer on Earth. If you bought a machine, chances were Intel powered it. Engineers didn't just work there, they aspired to it. Governments respected it. Competitors feared it. This was the company that helped build Silicon Valley. And for a moment, it looked untouchable. But dominance has an expiration date. Fast forward to today, and the picture is almost unrecognizable. The stock has collapsed roughly 60% from its highs. Tens of thousands face layoffs. Products are delayed. Rivals are accelerating. While the world shifted to smartphones, Intel hesitated. A missed opportunity that allowed an entire mobile ecosystem to form without them. Then came artificial intelligence, the most important computing shift in a generation. And once again, Intel watched from the sidelines as others defined the future. This isn't what decline looks like. It's what disruption feels like. From the wrong side. Because Intel is not just another tech company. It is infrastructure. It is supply chains, national security briefings, and the fragile balance of technological power. For decades, America relied on Intel to manufacture the brains of the digital world. Now the question echoing through boardrooms and government offices is no longer about growth. It's about survival. So how does a $200 billion giant drift toward irrelevance? How does a company that invented the future become trapped by its own past? How do the kings of Silicon lose the crown? And now, the company that built Silicon Valley is fighting for its life. Welcome to The Blueprint. To understand the funeral, we first have to attend the birth. Because before the crash, before the layoffs, and before the panic, Intel was invincible. Andy Grove didn't look like the archetypal titan of Silicon Valley. He spoke with a heavy Hungarian accent, carried himself with the alert posture of a man who had already escaped one catastrophe, and ran Intel like every decision could be its last. Having fled Soviet-controlled Hungary, Grove understood something most executives never truly grasp. Success is temporary. Comfort is dangerous. And the moment you believe you're safe, you're already falling behind. At Intel, paranoia became doctrine. Under Grove, Intel mastered a brutal discipline. Disrupt yourself before someone else does. When Japanese memory manufacturers began crushing margins in the 1980s, Grove made the call that defined the company's future. Abandon the business that built Intel and bet everything on microprocessors. It was a terrifying pivot. Thousands of jobs were reshaped. Entire divisions vanished. But the gamble worked. By the early 90s, the Intel processor had become the beating heart of the personal computer revolution. Every spreadsheet, every email, every dial-up connection flowed through silicon stamped with their name. Intel didn't just ride the PC wave, it engineered it. Then came one of the most brilliant marketing moves in corporate history. Intel Inside. Instead of selling to consumers directly, Intel convinced the world to demand a component they would never actually see. PC manufacturers suddenly weren't the stars, the chip was. The campaign transformed Intel from an invisible supplier into a global technology authority. By the late 1990s, the company wasn't just participating in Silicon Valley's rise, it was defining it. Margins exploded. Competitors lagged years behind. Intel's manufacturing process became so advanced that catching up looked almost impossible. Inside the company, a quiet belief began to take hold. We are not just ahead, we are inevitable. And yet, hidden inside every monopoly is a paradox. The systems that create dominance can also create rigidity. Grove's paranoia built a culture of relentless execution, but execution is different from imagination. Intel became extraordinarily good at winning the current war, and gradually less comfortable inventing the next battlefield. For years, that flaw remained invisible. Revenue kept climbing. The stock kept soaring. The world kept buying PCs. From the outside, it looked like permanence. From the inside, something subtler was happening. Paranoia was fading, and history has a pattern. The moment a company stops fearing the future is usually the moment the future arrives. So when Andy Grove stepped away from leadership, Intel didn't just lose a CEO, it lost its early warning system. Because the next threat to Intel wasn't going to come from another chipmaker. It was going to fit inside your pocket. In 2005, a quiet proposal landed on Intel's doorstep. It did not look like the future. It looked small. At the time, Intel measured success in gigahertz and thermal envelopes. Bigger chips, faster desktops, higher margins. The company's gravitational center was the personal computer, a market it still dominated with near mythical consistency. So when Apple came searching for a processor supplier for its first phone, the request triggered more skepticism than excitement. Why chase a low-power chip with thinner profits when PCs were still printing cash? Inside Intel, the math appeared straightforward. Smartphone processors demanded aggressive power efficiency, custom architecture, and pricing far below what the company was accustomed to. Early internal estimates suggested the deal might never reach Intel's margin thresholds, so leadership passed. A rational decision, on paper. 2 years later, the world watched Steve Jobs walk onto a stage and pull a glass rectangle from his pocket. Everything changed. iPhone first generation. The smartphone didn't just create a new category, it rewrote the physics of computing. Suddenly, billions of people carried supercomputers in their pockets. And the processor inside? It wasn't Intel. Instead, the mobile era consolidated around a different philosophy: energy efficiency over raw power, integration over modularity, scale over margin. Year by year, smartphones began outselling PCs. Then they dwarfed them. Intel, the company that once defined the trajectory of Silicon Valley, was absent from the largest computing expansion in human history. A missed opportunity doesn't always feel catastrophic in the moment. Sometimes it feels disciplined. To its credit, Intel did try to respond. Billions were poured into mobile initiatives. Entire engineering teams were reassigned. Chips were developed. Subsidies were offered to manufacturers in a costly attempt to buy market share. But ecosystems, once formed, are brutally resistant to outsiders. Developers had optimized elsewhere. Manufacturers had standardized elsewhere. Momentum had already escaped orbit. What makes this decision fatal isn't just the revenue Intel forfeited. It's the timeline it lost, because while Intel was defending the PC, the center of computing quietly migrated to the device you check 100 times a day. And the consequences didn't stop at phones. The mobile revolution forced a new design language for chips, one that would later become foundational for tablets, wearables, and eventually, artificial intelligence hardware. Intel didn't just miss a product cycle. It missed the new paradigm. History rarely announces its turning points, but this was one of them. And from here forward, Intel would no longer be shaping the future of computing. It would be reacting to it. Success doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes, quietly, gradually, almost politely. For decades, Intel was governed by engineers, leaders who spoke in transistor density, yield curves, and process nodes. Decisions were grounded in physics. Performance was a religion. Manufacturing was an identity. This was a company built by people who understood that in semiconductors, reality is not negotiable. But as Intel grew larger, something subtle began to shift. Operational excellence gave way to financial optimization. Engineering debates became spreadsheet discussions, and the center of gravity slowly migrated from the lab to the boardroom. But in semiconductor manufacturing, where a single node delay can cost billions and surrender entire markets, distance from the technical frontier is dangerous. Because chips obey physics, not quarterly guidance. Inside Intel, layers of management thickened, product roadmaps stretched, internal alignment meetings multiplied. What had once been a culture of constructive confrontation, Grove-era paranoia, softened into consensus. And consensus is comfortable, until the deadlines start slipping. The warning signs surfaced in manufacturing, the very engine that had powered Intel's dominance. Transitioning to smaller process nodes grew increasingly chaotic. Years behind schedule, the company that once set the cadence of Moore's Law was now struggling to keep it. Meanwhile, rivals accelerated. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, better known as TSMC, refined a pure-play foundry model, obsessively focused on fabrication. Advanced Micro Devices stopped trying to out-manufacture Intel and instead designed chips that leveraged TSMC's cutting-edge nodes. Different strategies. Same result. They pulled ahead. None of this looked dramatic from the inside. Revenue was still massive. The brand still carried weight. Data centers still depended on Intel silicon. Institutions rarely feel fragile while cash flows remain strong. That's the insidious nature of cultural drift. Decay hides behind momentum. And then came the moment that crystallized the shift. In 2005, Intel broke tradition and appointed its first CEO without a deep engineering background, Paul Otellini. It wasn't a reckless decision. Otellini was a brilliant operator who drove record profits. But symbolically, it marked a turning point. Intel was no longer led by technologists, but by economists. The company that once believed only the paranoid survive was becoming managerial. To be clear, culture alone doesn't topple a titan, but it changes how threats are perceived, how risks are tolerated, how fast an organization moves when the ground starts shifting beneath it. Because when the mobile wave passed, Intel hesitated. When manufacturing faltered, Intel recalculated. And when the next seismic shock began forming on the horizon, Intel was structurally unprepared to meet it. The industry was about to pivot again, not towards smaller devices, towards smarter ones. And this time, the stakes would be even higher than the smartphone. Artificial intelligence wasn't just another market. It was the next battlefield for computing itself. By the late 2000s, the industry was no longer fighting for speed. It was fighting for the future of intelligence. For years, Intel's CPUs were undisputed rulers. But AI demanded something different. While Intel refined the present, Nvidia architected the future. But the deepest cut wasn't just design, it was manufacturing. For decades, Intel believed owning its factories was an unassailable advantage. But as fabrication became astronomically expensive, TSMC embraced a different philosophy. Focus exclusively on manufacturing and become the best on earth at it. One by one, the world's most ambitious designers lined up at TSMC's doors, even Nvidia. The implication was staggering. The industry no longer orbited Intel. Intel was orbiting the industry. One by one, the world's most ambitious designers lined up at TSMC's doors. But betting against Intel is dangerous. Why? Because they have one final ace up their sleeve: the United States government. In a world where chips are the new oil, America cannot afford to let its only major manufacturer fail. Intel is effectively too big to die. The question is no longer about dominance, it's about survival. Will Pat Gelsinger pull off the greatest turnaround in corporate history? Or are we watching the slow, painful funeral of an American icon? What do you think? Is Intel a value trap or the contrarian buy of the decade? Let me know in the comments below. This has been The Blueprint. I'll see you in the next one.